Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, a late summer sojourn in Yellowstone and Grand Teton, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Charlie Reinertsen. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you for being here with us today. Take it away, Charlie.
Thanks for the intro and welcome everyone. In the past, I've done a few episodes of the Daily Dose on specific topics within Yellowstone, and you're welcome to check those out. But today, I really wanted to do the best that I could to transport you to Yellowstone. I was just guiding a trip for Natural Habitat Adventures a week ago, and so these photos have all been taken between September 5th and September 11th. So I wanted to give you a sense of what it's like in this place at this exact season, and also give you a little bit more of an in-depth look at a trip with Natural Habitat Adventures. Just a little bit about me first. I'm the founder of the Northern Peatlands Project. I've been in the field of science communications for 10 years. And if you haven't heard about peatlands, you would get a huge kick out of reading about them. You can sign up for a monthly publication that I do by going to twoline.com/tracks, and I'll give you all the information at the end of the webinar. But the general idea here is that these ecosystems are some of the greatest solutions to both our biodiversity crisis, where we're facing the next great extinction globally, and then also climate change. So these peatlands, these places are havens for wildlife, and they are also incredible carbon sinks. And so you can check out that work, and that's a huge focus for me. And then the rest of the year, I run a communications consulting business, and I get to guide for Natural Habitat Adventures about 4 times, 5 times a year. So here's just a quick look at the Yellowstone and Grand Teton Wildlife Safari itinerary with Natural Habitat Adventures. We're going to go through the 7-day itinerary, just broad strokes overview, and then we'll go into full detail with pictures of each of those days. So these trips are departing from either Bozeman or Jackson. And along the route, the primary objective is to search for wildlife. This is one of the best wildlife watching places on the planet. And certainly in North America, it's the largest intact temperate ecosystem. So it has this incredible opportunity to be able to see all of the wildlife that would have been there before humans were on the landscape. So just starting off on the first day, we get to explore Jackson Hole if you're starting from Jackson Hole on your departure. And this is a great wildlife viewing location, and the mountains here are unique to this area and a little bit different than what you'll encounter in Yellowstone. So just stunning scenery. The second day, you're also in Grand Teton and getting to float the Snake River, which is an unbelievable opportunity. And the third day kind of gets us up into Yellowstone. We're based out of Old Faithful Geyser Basin and get to dive into all these geothermal features that make Yellowstone such a special and amazing place. On the fourth day, we get into the Northern Range. We're really doing a lot of wildlife viewing. We're seeing some other iconic locations within the park. Here we're seeing on the right the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone River. And then the next day, this trip is really geared towards wildlife viewing. So we spend the most time possible in wolf country, which is really the Northern Range and in particular Lamar Valley. Day 6, we spend more time in Lamar Valley. And then day 7, we make our way to Bozeman for departures. So that's just the very quick rundown of the 7 days and how you spend them, where you spend them. And now we'll dive more particularly into, what this experience was starting on September 5th and going through the 11th. So that first full day is the first big experience is floating the Snake River. And this is such a beautiful experience. So I'm just going to play this video while I talk. The guides who are guiding these float trips are really knowledgeable about the Tetons and about the ecosystem of this area. And they are really talented at navigating the river. In this particular video, you don't really see it, but the Snake River is a highly braided river, which means that it breaks up into little channels. And so the guides that we hire to be able to do this portion of the trip are very, very well versed in how to read the river and how to move through it. And it just ends up being one of my favorite days of the whole itinerary. And we'll just take a couple looks here at these videos. As you can see, it's just a really peaceful experience getting to move down the river. This center video here as it's playing, that's actually the section of the Snake River that from up above on a terrace or a bluff, Ansel Adams took his really iconic photo of the Snake River. So just as a really special opportunity, it kind of gives some time for reflection on what we've experienced so far, because in the morning prior to this float, we do a lot of wildlife watching, and it can just be a really nice introduction to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So here you're just getting a few more of those shots of just the whole way down. You're just taking a look at those incredible mountains that were formed 13 million years ago. As you go down the river, there's a lot of opportunities for viewing wildlife. This here is a bald eagle that's a juvenile. And so juvenile bald eagles, all the way up until potentially as old as 5 years old, are going to have this mottled plumage, and they won't get that iconic look. This is further down the river. This is the adult bald eagle of having a bald head and a white tail. So if you ever see a raptor that looks like this, there are a couple other types of raptors that it could be, but most likely you're looking at a juvenile bald eagle. And bald eagles are great hunters. You're also going to have a really good chance of seeing osprey, which are the best fishermen on the river. Eagles are often scavenging and kind of following osprey and trying to steal their fish. The osprey are much better fishermen than the eagle. And this was shot with a telephoto lens, so about a 400 millimeter, looking at the Grand Teton. So even at this time of year, there's still some holdouts of snow on these mountains. And in particular places, there are remnants of glaciers, so places that never fully thaw, that are holding on to their ice pack. But those are becoming fewer and fewer throughout the Teton Range. This raft trip is also a great opportunity for birding. And so this right here is a yellow-rumped warbler hopping around eating insects on the banks of the river. On this particular float, this is looking to the east toward the Gros Ventre Mountains from the Snake River. And you can see those, what look like clouds, or this mushroom cloud. And that's actually smoke from a wildfire that's been burning for quite some time just east of Jackson Hole. And so it's pretty eerie for us to be able to look across and just see this huge plume of smoke, but that fire has been contained and managed, and it was a fire that was started by lightning. And so in that instance, fire crews are going to be managing that fire, making sure that it doesn't damage homes or threaten lives. But for the most part, if a fire is started naturally, we're going to let those fires burn, because this ecosystem has a very standard rate of fires. Like, they have fires in this ecosystem very frequently, and we call that a fire regime. The intensity of the fires and how frequently they happen is just part of the ecology of this area. Also on this first day, on this particular tour, this doesn't happen every time, but we had an opportunity to be able to pop over to the Murie Ranch. And the Murie Ranch is a really special place where Marty and Alois Murie lived. And they are, Marty in particular, is known as the grandmother of conservation. So this is a pretty cool place. It's set up exactly as it was when they were living there. And now this is operated by Teton Science Schools, which is my former graduate program where I went to school. And this porch is particularly neat to be able to sit on and talk about the history of the Muries because it's where a lot of the conversations around wilderness protections and so many of the environmental laws that came into place in the 70s were a product of conversations that were happening on this porch. So presidents like Bill Clinton were sitting on this porch with Marty talking about how they were going to protect wilderness areas in North America, in the United States. And others of huge importance also sat on this porch and were putting plans in place and trying to assemble the right people to be able to figure out how to protect our natural resources. So a really historic place and a place that's still used by educational groups and visitors to be able to learn more about wilderness conservation. On our way out of the valley towards the north end of the valley in Jackson Hole, we encountered a bison herd. We had our first look at some bison, which is really fun. On this picture, I'm going to zoom in a second here, but this guy was just being very charismatic with his purple tongue sticking out. And this herd of bison lives, around Grand Teton National Park most of the year. Bison, in terms of ungulates, which are all the hooved animals like elk and bison and bighorn sheep, those are examples of them. Bison are the ones that migrate kind of the smallest distance. And so this time of year, they're coming down into the valley from the foothills that they've been spending their time and making their way kind of to the northern edge of an area called the National Elk Refuge just north of Jackson Hole, the actual town. And so these animals are kind of moving down into the valley, prepping for winter. And also at this time of year, bison are in the rut. And what that means is it's mating season. And so bulls are more aggressive. They are spending a lot of time trying to both cover themselves in scent and also smell everyone around them. And they're competing with other bulls for the females, and they're using what's called a vomeronasal organ on the roof of their mouth are where the receptors are located so that they can actually smell pheromones. So these chemical signals are going to tell each other how healthy they are, whether a female is receptive or not. And so they're going to do a lot of fairly gross behaviors this time of year. So some of these big bulls are actually going to create these wallowing pits, these areas where they've rolled and tried to scratch off their winter coat throughout the season and coating themselves in dust for insect repellent throughout the year. But this time of year, they're using them for something a little bit different. So you'll often see these bulls urinating in the wallowing pit and then coating themselves in that dust urine so that they can fully exhibit how powerful they are to the rest of the herd. So a lot of really interesting wildlife viewing opportunities. And after that, we made our way to Jackson Lake Lodge. And this place in particular, this view looking out at Jackson Lake, right on and behind that are the Tetons. The highest peak is the Grand Teton. This view looking over the willows is just stunning every time, at all times of day, but especially at sunset and sunrise. And the place where we have dinner in the mural room at the Jackson Lake Lodge is just looking out over this. We always encourage folks to go out back and just enjoy the sunset, enjoy the night when we stay here. And the next morning, this is a picture with me and my co-guide, Riley. And the next morning, we made our way up to the top of Signal Mountain, which is where we are here, and did a lot of wildlife viewing on the way. So this is really a beautiful lookout, but as you can see, there's a ton of smoke in the distance in between us and the mountains. And that was wildfire smoke, not from the one that we were looking at in the picture just a little bit ago, but it's actually coming from the Idaho side, and also from California wildfires that are happening right now. And this just kind of the haziness in the sky just kind of changes day to day based on the way the weather patterns are moving. So one of our guests took this picture from the van. This was a photo going up Signal Mountain of a really huge bull elk. And you can see on his antlers, he's got some grass hanging off of it. Often they're going to be rubbing those antlers on different things, and they're also in the rut. So they're also getting aggressive. And for bull elk, they're starting to collect harems. And so one bull elk is going to collect as many female elk as possible, and he'll protect those elk from other bull elk throughout the whole season. And they're also going to, spar with other bulls over protection of that harem. And in addition to that, they're going to do this behavior that's one of the most amazing things to get to hear this time of year. We were a little bit too early to hear a full bugle, but they will actually do this really amazing vocalization. And it's kind of similar to what the bison's doing, wallowing. They're just trying to broadcast to other elk that they're the most powerful elk in the area. Uh, we also on this day we woke up, we went to Signal Mountain, we did some wildlife watching, and then we made our way into Yellowstone National Park. And the topography starts to change, the wildlife start to become a little bit different, and pretty quickly we experienced our first bison jam. And that's just when bison are in the road, causing a backup of vehicles. And so this huge bison was leading the charge. We called him the pilot car, kind of. And we counted the cars that were behind him, and there were 45 vehicles behind this first one that were backed up because of that big bison. So as we made our way into Yellowstone National Park, we're on top of a super volcano, and so that essentially you're as close as you can possibly be to magma below the surface of the Earth. And there's this huge plume of magma that comes out from Earth's core that's sitting underneath the crust of the Earth. And that plume of magma is what's causing all of the incredible geothermal features that you're able to see in Yellowstone. So on this first day, as we got into Yellowstone National Park, we visited West Thumb Geyser Basin, which has some really amazing geothermal features, and it's also a beautiful view of Yellowstone Lake, which is a really gigantic freshwater lake that has a lot of interesting ecology. It really drives a lot of relationships and wildlife activity for hundreds of miles outside of Yellowstone Lake. It has a really big impact on the ecosystem at large. Here's one of the views, just kind of looking over the top of uh, uh, hot spring. And then the runoff from the hot spring is causing all of that um, land to have a lot of mineral deposits. That's why it's white. In particular, silica is one of the compounds that's precipitating out as the water from these hot springs is evaporating. And then that in the distance, you're seeing the west thumb of Yellowstone Lake. And if you look at a map of Yellowstone Lake, west thumb is this big circle, and that's because it's a crater from a previous eruption of the supervolcano. About and that we won't dive into that too much because this will turn into a 5-hour presentation instead of just a brief presentation. Here's another close-up. One of the things that I love to do um, is to take a long lens instead of a short lens. Just a brief aside about photography, because I find that some of the detail shots are things that other people might not have. A lot of people come with a really wide angle lens and they want to get sweeping views, but I really love getting to see the details and seeing how, you get those bubbles coming up through the water and the contrast between the blue, 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 which is actually the color is not from a dye or anything like that. It's actually from organisms that are living in the water, thermophiles. They're these single cellular organisms that absorb some wavelengths of light and reflect others. And so in different areas, you're going to see different colors, and those different colors represent different species or communities of thermophiles. So these boardwalks give you really incredible ability to get really close and really observe all of the details. Here we're seeing that orange is actually a bacterial mat, and then the water is running off. And as it runs off, it's also evaporating and leaving behind these white silica deposits. Here's another shot just looking out towards west thumb of Yellowstone Lake. So we really had unseasonably warm weather. September 5th through 11th, it was hot every day, getting up to 80 degrees. But you also start the day pretty chilly. So it starts at about 45, 50 degrees and then warms up to the middle of the day and then cools off in the evening. Later on this day, we made it down to Artist Point, which is a really famous location for looking at the lower falls of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone River. And this area is really famous because there was the Hayden expedition in the late 1800s that was sent by the US government to be able to go through this area and document everything that they could find. And when they also were traveling with scientists, geologists, as well as artists. And Thomas Moran painted a really famous painting of this location. It's a huge painting, 8 feet tall, and I believe right now it's in the Smithsonian. And part of why they were doing that was to actually convince or show people back east what this landscape was like. There were so many stories coming back about kind of this land of fire and ice, of not really understanding how the land could have these areas where there's boiling hot water and steam. And it's just a very hard thing to wrap your head around at that point in time in history. And those paintings became really pivotal in helping to decide to make Yellowstone National Park our first national park. So here's our group photo from the 13 guests and 2 guides that were on this particular trip. Another special thing we do on that particular night, we stay at Old Faithful Geyser Basin, which gives you the opportunity just to basically walk out your door and be here. That's actually right at Old Faithful, and typically this is an area that is just jam-packed with people, and it's a really special experience to get to see what it's like when no one's there. I'm out on this boardwalk at 6:30 a.m. and 0 people around me. It's cold, so the steam from the geysers is particularly dramatic. So it's just a really neat opportunity. Later on that morning, we made our way to Grand Prismatic, and Grand Prismatic is right on the Firehole River, and this little runoff from Grand Prismatic comes down into the river, and it's just really, really a stunning spot. And this evening, we make our way to the north end of the park, and then we exit the park up towards Gardner, where we stay overnight. And this is the really famous Teddy Roosevelt Arch, and this is kind of that iconic location for entering Yellowstone National Park. We stay right on the river. And the first night that we got into our hotel, uh, there's an elk herd right across the riverbank. And so we just got to, enjoy watching the elk and then go to dinner right across the street. The next morning is an early departure, and we try as much as we can in this trip to match our wildlife watching opportunities with the times when wildlife are most active. So most of the wildlife are crepuscular, meaning they're active early in the morning and late in the evening, right as the sun is rising and as the sun is setting. And so this is a picture taken in Slough Creek, which is in the northern range. And we were just so incredibly lucky. In this picture, you're seeing bison on the edge of the river right there. And then we had a huge rainbow come in that was absolutely stunning. So we were just really lucky to be able to get to experience this. And no matter what wildlife you have the opportunity to see on this trip, uh, just being in these places and being there early before most people are in the park, it's just a spectacular experience and really, really special. So this rainbow was one of the highlights for sure. And this morning was also a great morning to be able to dive into a lot of bison behavior and their history. Bison are a species that's in recovery. Historically, we had 20 to 30 million bison in the Great Plains region of North America, 30 to 60 million. Today, we have about 20,000 bison in conservation herds. Bison were hunted down to a population of about 500 animals, which is 60 million down to 500. So there were huge efforts to be able to bring bison back and to restore them, and those efforts are ongoing. And one of my favorite things about guiding for natural habitat adventures is the relationship with World Wildlife Fund. So World Wildlife Fund is doing conservation work around the globe, and one of their big focus areas for the Intermountain West is bison reintroduction. And their work that they're doing is really amazing in that they're working with indigenous partners to be able to help support those communities in bringing back this species that their entire culture, much of their culture, is reliant upon. So definitely worth checking out. And I'll be doing another webinar on bison photography. I believe it's Friday, November 1st or 2nd, but that'll be on the schedule coming up as well. So just a really beautiful morning in Slough Creek on this particular day. And one of the amazing things this year is this new mechanism for our vans. We got new vans this year, and this is their first season of being used. And as you can see, they've got hats. And so with the push of a button, the top of the vehicle extends up, and that gives us a way to safely view wildlife at a really close proximity. Because there are safe distances and legally required distances that you have to maintain between you and wildlife in the park. And if we park our vans, we pop the roof up. If the herd of bison moves towards us, it's legal for us to be as close as the wildlife would like to be. And so for this particular moment, this herd of bison started much further away, moved towards us, and then just kind of kept going past. And this was just a really fun moment to be able to quietly let everyone experience what it's like to be in the middle of a bison herd. Uh, and this is honestly like one of my favorite things each trip is the first moment that we get like this. Because bison there are about 4,300 bison in the population in the northern range. So there are a lot of bison in Yellowstone. Not nearly as many as there were historically, obviously, but there's always an opportunity to be able to do something like this. And here's just a little video of what it feels like to be in the van right next to the herd of bison. And for photographers, this is really amazing. That viewing platform uh, that you're standing on gives you a ton of stability with your camera to be able to rest the camera there and be able to just kind of use that like a monopod for taking incredible pictures. And this was one of the interactions that I loved, that I got kind of a sequence of shots. This big bull bison has a bunch of sagebrush debris around its horn because it's just been aggressively rubbing its horns on different plants. And he saw this other smaller bull and wanted to have a couple words with him. So the vocalizations are probably the best part of this experience. While you're sitting in the vehicle and the roof is up and the windows are down, you hear everything. And so I won't even try to make a bison noise, but they're making these deep guttural sounds, and it's really, really impressive to be able to watch. And the thing about this picture that I love, it looks really aggressive, like a really aggressive interaction at first. And then you look more closely and his tongue is sticking out just a little bit. They never even sparred. He was just looking at that other bison, letting him know that this is his territory. And so that's the full sequence of that particular interaction. One of the things I love about spending a lot of time with bison is having the opportunity to play with lighting with photography. So, and certain moments you can just have an area spot, lit up. If there's kind of cloud cover that's a little bit broken up, you can just have a changing light. And if you get the right moment, you can get a shot that, I was really excited about this one because that one bison was, lit up really well. All right, so um, moving on, we had another experience at lunch that was really neat. There were some fish biologists who were doing a population survey, and they were heading out with all their gear on the river. And they were actually headed back country about 10 miles, carrying all of their equipment. And they were doing an electroshocking study. So they were putting their wands in the river, shocking the river itself. Fish get stunned momentarily and allows them to capture them, count them, and do a population survey. They're doing a lot of restoration work in this area, with a particular focus on Yellowstone cutthroat trout being the target species to ensure that their population is healthy. That population has struggled a lot in recent years because of the introduction of lake trout in Yellowstone Lake. So that was a really neat opportunity. Sometimes you just get these serendipitous moments where something new comes up that you get a chance to see. On our way out of the park on this particular day, we got to see an osprey catch fish and feed on it. This is pretty far away from us, but with binoculars and with scopes, you're able to get a really close view. That osprey was feeding on a cutthroat trout, and it was actually, this is an adult, and nearby there was a young osprey, and they were teaching each other how to hunt, teaching the young how to hunt. On the last day, this is a picture that Riley took through the scope. We got a chance to go to swan ponds, and trumpeter swans are another species that was hunted to near extinction. For their feathers were used as pen and ink for quills for writing. And so they were hunted to near extinction, and then conservation efforts brought them back. Now there's a year-round population in the park. So that's another great conservation success. And here is one of my favorite shots from the trip. This was just a really early morning, so that this picture was kind of corrected for some pixelation that happened, some noise that happened from using a high ISO. If you want to geek out on camera stuff, I'll do a presentation next Friday, but we'll stick to just the itinerary for now. But this was just a really sweet interaction between the elk mom and her calf. This is about how big those calves are right now. This is a young of the year, and they'll stay together through this next winter and potentially another year as well. So that brings me to the end of our trip. Those are all the pictures that I've taken on this most recent trip, and just wanted to open it up to any questions that you might have. And this is also, you can scan the QR code and check out those stories around the Northern Peatlands Project, which is, my passion project. I'm trying to raise awareness of these ecosystems and the ability to protect and restore them and help make sure that our biodiversity is protected as well. So I'll come back to that, but I'll leave that here just with my contact information, and I'd love to take any questions you might have.
All right, thank you, Charlie. Now, before we start in with the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your GoToWebinar control panel. And if you're interested in traveling to Yellowstone, you can visit our website at nathab.com for trip details or call us at 800 543 8917 to speak with an adventure specialist. All right, let's dive into some questions. So, what is the weather like at this time of year? Is it cold enough at night where we don't have to worry about mosquitoes?
Yeah, so this time of year is typically much cooler than what it was for during this trip. So we were there from the 5th until the 11th. Typically, you'd expect the highs being 70, 75 um, at the most. And you might be able to get trips where it doesn't get over 50 degrees. Right after this trip ended, there was a cold front, and there were a couple days where the high didn't get above 50 degrees. So, like I said, this was an unseasonably warm trip. Typically, for the month of September, uh, we joke that you can get every season in a day. So you kind of have to be prepared for any weather during this time. And honestly, that's kind of the truth no matter when you visit Yellowstone, just because you're at high elevation.
Great, thanks for that, Charlie. So, are there any issues between hikers and the bison? If is there, are they afraid of humans? And is there anything I can do to protect myself if I'm suddenly surrounded by a herd?
Yeah, with bison, you know, it's a very easy thing to not get close to wildlife in Yellowstone. Um, Most visitors to the park are driving, and so you always have the opportunity to stay in your vehicle rather than get out. And this is a huge effort from the park to be able to communicate with visitors about safe visiting protocols. And so with bison, it's 25 yards. You need to be at least 25 yards away from a bison. So there's really no risk if you're paying attention of suddenly being surrounded. That was us parking in a place near a bison herd and allowing those bison to come close to us to have that experience from the vehicle of observing them really closely. If you're visiting through the park, there are great sight lines. You're able to see how far away they are and decide whether or not it's safe to get outside. With that said, if you're going on hikes from the trailhead, you do want to hike always in Yellowstone National Park with bear spray if you're doing this trip alone. And the guides on the NatHab trips always carry bear spray, and that's kind of the second line of defense. The first line of defense is just being aware of your surroundings and not going into scenarios that might be dangerous, such as bushwhacking through a field of willow where you don't have visibility and you could come across a bear at close proximity. So stuff like that is never going to happen on a NatHab trip. We're really smart in how we move about, and with a little reading and kind of studying up, you can travel independently to Yellowstone very, very safely as well.
Does this trip make a stop at Mammoth Hot Springs?
Yeah, so I didn't have pictures from that, but it does. We actually on this itinerary, because we're staying in Gardner, you go through Mammoth multiple times, and on this particular itinerary, we chose to visit Mammoth Hot Springs on the last day when we were looking at that picture of the swan. We also spent a number of hours in Mammoth Hot Springs. And it's a really unique place because it has that travertine terrace formation. Travertine is another um, oh my gosh, mineral that's dissolved in the water that precipitates out, and it creates these amazing formations at Mammoth Hot Springs.
Great, thank you. So let's talk wolves for a second. Were you able to see one? And if I wanted to see one, is there a best time of year to actually see them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a question we get all the time. And uh, so you can never count on being able to see a wolf. And if you do see a wolf, it's likely that you'll be seeing it through a scope. You'll have a great view through the scope. Um, Often they're not close. For seeing wolves, the often the best time of year is in the spring, June, end of May, into early July, because wolves are denning at that point. So they're raising pups. They have a den site, and we know where those den sites are. And as long as those den sites are within view of a road, which they typically are, this year there was a wolf pack at Slough Creek that was denning there and created some great wolf watching opportunities. With that said, you can have years where they're not denning in a place that's visible. So then you just have to hope that there's a kill where they make a kill close to the road, and then the wolves will be moving around that area and at the kill feeding. So this trip we did not see wolves, and that's the first trip that I've ever guided where we didn't see wolves. But this was, in like I mentioned, it was an unseasonably hot week, and the wolves are no longer at their dens. They're moving about chasing prey. And because it was so hot, they probably were increasing their activity overnight and in the darker times when you can't see anything. So we on this trip did not see wolves.
Great, thanks for answering that. Uh, so if a bison were to encounter a wolf, is there any way that it could protect itself?
Yeah, so a bison is a herd animal, so they're typically in a big group and there's safety in numbers. And wolves usually hunt in packs, and they're going to go for the weakest member. They're going to try and isolate individuals. So if a bison randomly were to come across a single wolf, in all likelihood, there wouldn't be an interaction. It's more that they're looking for the weakest and trying to go after those individuals. And you'll see wolf packs test a bison herd, or maybe a little small group of bison got separated from the herd, and the wolves will chase that group, and they're chasing them, kind of watching to see is there an individual that's the weakest that then they should try and separate from the rest of the group. And we got to actually see that behavior last year, this same time of year in Lamar Valley. It was just this incredible, like at dusk scenario. Right as the light was, as the sun was going down, we just saw 8 wolves break out of the tree line and then give chase to bison all the way across the valley. And they were testing to see if there was any weak individual. But so we kind of watched that interaction. There was no consequence, and then all the animals kind of dispersed after that.
So is this trip good for me if I am an avid bird watcher?
Absolutely. There's a lot of great birding. And if you go in July, maybe August, you have a chance. There's Lahardy Rapids is a location where you'll be able to see harlequin ducks, which is a species that some people are not able to see in a lot of places. There are a lot of species that are really fun, like in June, July. We saw tons of species that I wasn't able to get good photographs of. But this is a really amazing place, and you can get kind of a double-sided sheet of the common types of birds that you'll see in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So you can kind of look at that and see the common birds you would encounter. That's a good example. Yeah.
So Charlie, do you have a favorite moment from your most recent Yellowstone trip, or one that you've had in general, something that was unique that you don't usually get to see?
For me, this trip, one of the things that really stood out was that the rainbow in Sloop Creek. And that place is particularly special to me because a few years ago, when there were all those floods in Yellowstone National Park that took out roads and took out a ranger house, it was really devastating. It was they're still trying to calculate how often a flood event like that might happen, but it's either once every 500 or once every 1,000 years flood. And so that right when that was happening, the huge portion of the northern range was inaccessible. And I had a trip a couple of years ago that they opened up Slough Creek, Little America and Slough Creek, to guiding trips only. And we got there first. I literally got to open the gate and we drove up into Slough Creek. We were the only two vehicles. Our NatHab trip was the only uh, guided trip in that entire region. And typically, if you've been to Yellowstone or think about going to Yellowstone, it's really there are a lot of visitors to the park. So to be able to have entire sections of road entirely to yourself was just such an amazing opportunity, both for wildlife viewing and just kind of a place that I'd visited so many times with many other people. To just have it all to ourselves was really, really special.
Well, thanks for sharing, Charlie. Unfortunately, that is going to be the last question that we do have for today. So I'd like to hand it back to you for your closing comments.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in. And let's see here if I can go back up a slide. Yeah. So next week, Friday, I'll be doing another daily dose of nature. You can register next week. We'll be covering macro photography. So I'll include all the places that I guide, from Yellowstone National Park to the monarch butterfly migration in Michoacan, Mexico, all the way up to places that I don't guide, but that I live and that I explore all the time, like our northern peatlands. And so you can come and learn about tips and tricks for if you're interested in exploring macro photography. And similar to today, we'll talk a lot about the subject matter, what I'm actually photographing, and what we can learn about them. So the last little nugget I'll leave you with is this is sphagnum moss, and it can hold up to 40 times its weight in water. It has antiseptic properties that made it a really good bandage substitute when we had a shortage of supply in World War II. So come and learn things like that next week, Friday, for the Discovering Hidden Worlds webinar.
Charlie, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. If you're interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, give us a call at 800-543-8917, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.